welcome everybody. Thanks for being here. I'm Tom Foster with Inc. I'm really thrilled to be here with Alyssa Pollock of Fellow, Andy Dunn, and Jonathan Barrett. Andy Dunn's company is called, what's your new company? Pi is Andy's new app. I'm sorry, I almost said Bonobos. Andy was the founder of Bonobos. Pi is Andy's new company, and Jonathan Barrett's company is NextSense, whose product is Tone. We're going to be talking about the name of the panel is This Is Your Brand on Entrepreneurship. As you know, I was planning for this yesterday, and I was writing some questions and thinking about what I was going to say, and I went to ChatGPT and I asked, what are the mental attributes of entrepreneurs? And it gave me a list. And then I asked the next question, what are the mental attributes of ADHD? And it was the exact same list. And that list came down to creative problem solving, risk-taking, adaptability to change, multitasking, and high energy and enthusiasm. And so we were talking backstage, and basically that was every one of them was like, yep. And so that's what we're going to talk about. Let's just start by, let's just go down the line. Alyssa, do you want to first share sort of what you're working on right now with Fellow?
Yeah.
And your background. Just give a little sense of like where you came from too.
Yeah. My name's Alyssa Pollock, and I'm the CEO of Fellow. Fellow is an app that connects you with people who've been in your shoes. No matter what challenge or situation or decision you're navigating, you can find someone on Fellow who's been there, who can provide practical, contextual guidance. And the reason I'm qualified to do that job is I've been through some stuff in my life, some hard stuff, come out the other side and have given advice and paid it forward time and time again. And I was also early on the team at Uber, building the marketplace kind of from the ground up. So balancing the supply and demand and getting people what they want when they needed it. And so we're just taking that approach and building a place for people to connect and kind of being the warmer side of the internet, getting people to connect and get the closest that they need for the tough times that they're going through.
Let's just keep going down the line. Andy.
What's up? I'm Andy. Psyched to be here. My new company is called Pi. It's an app for making friends, specifically platonic friends. The idea behind Pi is the optimal size of a group for making friends is 6 people. So we use AI to bring groups of 6 together, and then we're big believers that people will not convene others out of the goodness of their hearts because it's a pain in the fucking ass. And so we compensate people who bring others together through our creator fund, and we call those folks IRL creators. Reason I care about this is my last company, I sold pants for 13 years on the internet. I don't recommend it. And along that journey, I was dealing with bipolar 1, but I was closeted about it and untreated and unmedicated, which is not a great approach to bipolar. So now focusing on a new issue, which is social isolation, which I experienced when I moved from New York to Chicago. There's no medication for social isolation. You can treat the symptoms, but otherwise you actually have to get off the sofa, get in front of people, and that's what Pi's about.
Awesome. Jonathan Barrett. I am founder of NextSense. We spun out of Google, and it was a moonshot. Could we enhance sleep? Could we find a way to take 6 hours and turn it into 8? Evidently, Google thought no, otherwise they wouldn't let me spin out. But they have been a great support, and so we started the pharmaceutical industry because the Apple Watch for me is a medical device. I hope it's a consumer device for you, but I had atrial fibrillation in my 20s, and then one time in 2019, I had a little bit too much coffee and too much adrenaline, and the Apple Watch went off, and I was in atrial fibrillation. And I told Google, I was working on these earbuds at Google. They were brain buds. We thought maybe they'll control, phones. Maybe it'll be BCI. But I said, hey, if you ever close down my project, let me spin it out, and we can make these brain buds that will help the 1% of people with epilepsy. So that's where we started, and we did that for pharmaceutical companies. But at some point, I just got bored doing it for pharmaceutical companies, and I said, let's bring this into a consumer package. And so the Tone Buds launched in June, and we're going to bring better sleep for hopefully a lot of people.
That's amazing. Let's stick with you for a minute, and can you talk a little bit about how the Tone earbuds have been helpful to you, and specifically, again, we're talking about this is your brain on entrepreneurship. Yeah. So how they have been useful to you in sort of optimizing yourself for your work lifestyle.
Yeah. So, I also had a prescription for ADHD meds, and, as I'm a layperson, I'm a philosophy major turned neuroscientist and ML scientist. I learned a lot of that because I wasn't sleeping a lot. The more I learned about the brain, the more I realized, there's really a spectrum of pathologies, and sometimes it's really serious, and that's it takes a lot of management, but sometimes there's sort of a hidden superpower in that. And I kind of, that curiosity, it happened partly with my son. He had OCD, and that was, a real kryptonite for him until it wasn't. And now it's a superpower for him. And so I kind of started to wonder, what about my ADHD? Could it lead to more creativity? The fact that I don't sleep a lot, but I nap a lot, could I somehow use that? And then I kind of realized, I was on modafinil as well. It's a really strong wake-promoting agent because if you're not sleeping, you need something to, kind of keep you up in the day. And I thought, I'm working on brain earbuds. Like, why don't I just lean on them and try to nap whenever I'm tired? Like, not use medication to stay awake, right? And it's a very unconventional sleep cycle. I nap 2 or 3 times a day. I nap definitely, today. But I slept 5 hours, and that's okay because I have a way to kind of make up for it. So anyway, it's been a great journey. It's super fun to have a product, which you guys have done. You built it for yourself, right? Like on some level, if you're not building a product that you want to use and you want to talk about, then what are you doing?
That's kind of fascinating. All 3 of you built a product for yourselves, didn't you? Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, so wait, I just want to understand your unconventional sleep cycle. So 5 hours last night, overnight,
Yeah.
right? And then when you take a nap using the Tone earbuds, how long are we talking?
It's usually 10 minutes, 12 minutes. It's really, really short. I learned that there's a chemical called adenosine that builds up. And when you drink coffee, you're basically blocking the adenosine receptor. And so it's sort of an artificial way to do it. But like when you lose consciousness, the brain flushes that adenosine. And that's why, during COVID, people started taking these cat naps. If that's you, talk's over. Feel good. You take your naps. Naps are actually really helpful. People that nap more than 20 minutes, they hate naps. So if you have to, set an alarm. Don't nap longer than 20 minutes.
But it's going to take me 10 to 12 minutes to fall asleep.
Well, see, that's the thing. Yeah, so with the Tone Buds, we're going to show you what your brain was like for 10 minutes with your eyes closed. So when you close your eyes, the occipital region of your brain stops processing visual information. Then it starts generating an alpha rhythm, which is like 8 to 12 hertz. It's like a spa for your brain. And so we show people what that spa was like, and so you don't have to fall asleep to get actually rejuvenated. And it's funny because when people actually know that they're getting some value out of it, they sometimes fall asleep because of that.
That's fascinating. Okay, Andy, I want to move to you. So Jonathan just used the word superpower a minute ago when he was talking about himself, and that's a word that comes up when you think about when you see the list that I was talking about at the top of this conversation, where these attributes of something like ADHD overlap with entrepreneurial attributes. It's very easy to say, hey, these are superpowers. We can channel these things, but there's also danger in not taking seriously a condition that is a clinical condition as well. And so in your journey dealing with bipolar, I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about that line between dealing with something on a clinical level and also recognizing where it gave you real powers in your very successful entrepreneurial career.
Yeah. I didn't know sleep had a PR firm. I love that. I actually going to leave to go take a nap. So bipolar has got one of the mood states that is actually really helpful for building stuff, which is called hypomania. Hypomania is effectively feeling like you're on fire, right? Lots of big ideas, grandiose sense of self, good for entrepreneurs, decreased need for sleep, which isn't good. A little bit of more irresponsible judgment, like bad judgment around finances, little promiscuous, and also like lots of great ideas and a lot of energy, which is kind of central casting for an entrepreneur having a good day. We are, according to my psychiatrist, all supposed to be hypomanic for, call it 20 or 30 days a year and not much more than that. And I would be hypomanic for 200 days a year. And the way that I medicated it was alcohol, because alcohol feels like an upper, but a bit of a downer apparently. And so alcohol will help you sleep if you're hypomanic. It will also enhance a lot of those behaviors in good and bad ways. And then you get bad sleep and you wake up and it's actually a mood suppressant. The problem with being hypomanic 200 days a year is it tends to be paid down with depression. So you kind of need to be depressed 50 to 100 days a year if you're that energized the other 200. And so I would kind of disappear. I would schedule meetings on my calendar and go home and sleep for 4 hours. I would sleep all weekend, so I'd sleep about 18 to 20 out of 24 hours and then hide it and come back to work on Monday barely and pretend like, I just had a busy weekend or whatnot. So bipolar, it can be a helpful ingredient in productivity and creativity, but it comes at too high of a price. And then on the manic side, which is when hypomania runs amok, where you actually think you're Jesus 2.0, as I did, which is awesome, by the way, for a week. If you haven't been the Messiah for a week, highly recommend it. you feel very powerful, but obviously it's a nightmare for everyone else. And so what I learned was I need medication daily. I need to see a psychiatrist twice a week. I need to make sure I sleep 6 to 8 hours a night. And until I get those things in place, I don't really have permission to do what I'm doing. And so that was the journey for me.
That's really fascinating. Alyssa, I want to talk a little bit about, so we're talking about the line between sort of clinical and non-clinical sort of viewpoints of these traits we're talking about. When it comes to building Fellow, how are you thinking about that line between sort of clinical and subclinical conditions that people can seek help with on your platform?
Yeah. Well, I think something really interesting about Andy's story, I've read his book. If you haven't yet, you should. It's amazing.
Burn Rate. It really is an incredible read.
It is an incredible story. I think a big takeaway for me from your book was when you came out with the issue, that's when it started to get better. And so when I think about the company that we're building at Fellow, part of it starts with the company culture, right? We're built on vulnerability. So I come to work and I say, all right, guys, and this ties back to the entrepreneurial neurotype. I've been described as impatient, easily excitable, maybe overly eager about things, perhaps defiant or impulsive. And so how I bring those things to bear in a positive light at work comes from saying them out loud, showing up kind of as my whole self, and then building a team around me to help kind of counterbalance all of that. And part of what we're doing at Fellow is destigmatizing getting it out in the open, right? We want to make it easier and more approachable to talk to someone about navigating maybe some of your difficult personality traits or something even more tactical or acute like caregiver burden or navigating a divorce. So that's what we're building at Fellow, but it starts with the company culture that is oriented around that vulnerability and being really open about your issues.
Yeah. Alyssa, can I share something from this weekend that I think validates what you said?
Yeah.
So I was with a group of guys. I'm very fortunate that I have a group of guys I can be vulnerable with, right? I've known them for a long time. But I said to them for the first time, I think I'm a narcissist. And it was hard for me to say that, right? Because my wife gave me a book, and it's called It's Not You, right? And it's a book about narcissistic abuse. It was really hard. But, my friend who's known me a long time, he's gay, he says, Jonathan, I feel like you came out this weekend. And he goes, I know it was hard. It was really hard for you, but I think it broke the shame. I mean, I even in front of here, I'm only saying it because I said it to my friends, and I'm hoping to break that shame, because I think narcissism is also, there's some positive aspects that allow us to be entrepreneurs, but we do very toxic things, right? And so I just think that, what you're doing, I may even sign up for that so that I can help people that identify that, right? Because as you help others, you're helping yourself.
I'll probably be your fellow.
Okay. All right, brother.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. And what I've been reflecting on lately is we are in a privileged position as founders, CEOs at the top of our organizations to be able to come out and say, here's all the ways that I'm strong and here's all the ways that I'm trouble, right? And what I want to do is try to normalize that throughout the ranks, right? I haven't felt comfortable doing that in other jobs until now. And so I think that, we as leaders of companies can kind of invite that vulnerability to the table to make sure that you don't have to be at the top to feel comfortable voicing that.
Yeah, and we talked about not letting Tom ask any questions.
Yeah, no, I think
he encouraged
great.
us.
That's great.
And what I would say, as someone who has come out as having what is called a severe mental illness, bipolar 1, I always assumed I'd never be able to raise money. No one would ever want to work for me. People would think about me in a way that would be limiting. No one would ever want to date me or marry me. And what I learned was nobody cares. Nobody is sitting here right now thinking about someone else. You're thinking right now about you and how this applies to you. Or maybe a friend or a loved one. Nobody cares about you except your mama, right? And so once you have this framework that your suffering and pain is not a big deal for other people for the most part, it's just for you, then why not share that suffering and pain when you have a chance to be with other people, to make it more connecting? And that was a big aha for me.
So that's a really good seg to my question. I am going to get a question in. No, so Alyssa, I want to go on something you said. You were talking about yourself and recognizing and coming out with, what you're accepting your traits, but then also surrounding yourself professionally with people who can balance those things out. And Andy, to your point about nobody's thinking about you. Well, they are to the extent that your behavior affects them, especially if you're in a position of leadership. So I'm curious how the three of you guys have all thought about that process of surrounding yourself with people who balance you out. Has that been, especially for the two of you, we know it is for Alyssa, something that you've explicitly tried to do in your sort of hiring?
Yeah, I've certainly been really intentional, especially when you're starting something from scratch. Like the first 5 to 10 people you surround yourself with, you need to connect with them on all the ways, right? Your personalities need to match, the passion level, the intensity, the fierceness, all that needs to check out. And I think what I have done, there's no magic way of doing this, but I think just being really real about who you are in that interview process, not trying to hide the ugly bits or the shadow material, just being really upfront, that kind of lends itself to self-selection. People who can handle my intensity are going to self-select into joining my team. And then I, make sure that they can keep things organized and keep us focused when I might have kind of shiny object syndrome. So that's how I've done it. It's just with really a lot of self-awareness, but then a lot of vulnerability and transparency around it.
Does that resonate for you guys?
For me, the wake-up call was I assaulted my now wife and mother-in-law. So I was arrested and charged with felony and misdemeanor assault. And so what I learned was that the cost of not dealing with my shit was that it would cause harm to other people. And so even if I wasn't willing to do it for me, if I didn't want to put loved ones through the chaos that I was putting them through, I had to get my act together, right? I had to figure out this thing. And I had a lot of suicidal ideation in the 6 months after I got out of jail. And the only reason I kept going was I didn't want to let these people down who'd already been through hell. So what bothers me about the world right now is we have neurodivergent leaders and creatives and entrepreneurs out there who are just getting away with murder. They're just surrounded by enablers, and they get to be assholes, and we to some extent enable it by lionizing it and celebrating it, rather than building people around us who can hold us accountable and say, look, it's not okay to be that way. And my now wife was clear with me. She was like, I don't have any issue being with you as long as you take your medication and see your doctor, because then you're accountable. And that was a big wake up for me as well.
Yeah. I think, for me, these men that I met with this weekend, they're not associated with my company, but they're my personal checks and balances. And we definitely spent time, kind of digging in on certain areas. And I think the other thing when I'm hiring, most recently I've been trying to hire just an office manager. And I burned through one of my wife's top recommendations. She was a chief of staff. She had been a chief of staff for a principal in the Bay Area, and a principal meaning a billionaire managing multiple staff. But she quit after 40 days with me. And that was my wake-up call. Man, I'm this hard to work for. So most recently, this office manager that I'm in the process of hiring, this was just last week, I said, I've done an inventory, and only 25% of EAs would recommend working for me. So you should find out why, right? There are people that work with me. Talk to Caitlin. She's figured it out. Talk to Akshay. I have a superpower to get people to work for me. The guy, if you guys all like Apple's Bluetooth, that guy that made that for Apple for 10 years, he works on my team. I got him to come to work for me when I had 4 months of cash, right? There's something that I do to bring people, right? But the problem is I can really piss people off, and I got to bring more awareness to it. And I think part of it is expressing it. You've got to talk about it, and that's what's inspiring, about your story and your platform. And I hope that there's something here that you're going to turn to somebody at some point and say, "Hey, I struggle with this," because it loses the power. So much of it is when it's buried unconsciously, the computer inside just starts doing weird shit. And I also know a lot about dreams. So if you have weird dreams, that's a sign.
The transparency of this conversation is really refreshing. Thank you, guys. So I want to pivot to talking about another aspect of entrepreneurship and something that we have to deal with mentally, which is, Andy, you used the term social isolation. We've all seen a couple years ago when the Surgeon General talked about there being a loneliness epidemic. Andy, let's start with Pi, which is a platform for making friends, right? Which is really directly addressing this notion of social isolation. Can you talk a little bit about how that has been something you've experienced as an entrepreneur, and what it looks like to try to build a product that can help with that?
Yeah, so for me, I lived in New York for 15 years. I was in the Bay Area for a while, and then during the pandemic, my dad got ill with terminal cancer. And so it was like, okay, it's time to go back to Chicago. My wife's an entrepreneur. She had reasons to go back. And I got there, and I was like, oh, this is amazing. Like, my parents are here. My sister's here. I grew up here. I've got a couple friends. And it took like 2 years to realize I actually don't have any real connections outside of my family. And as much as I love my family, we all need platonic friendship, and we all need a community to rely on and belong to. And I had none of that behind Zoom. And so I was like, all right, I want to make some friends. And it took a while to articulate that I don't have any friends. I didn't think of myself as someone that could be friendless, and yet I was. And so then it was like, well, how do I make friends? And I realized I didn't have an answer to that. And so that was the beginning of how do we build something to do that. And effectively what Pi does is it's kind of like Meetup, but aimed at a new generation, or maybe where Facebook, when Facebook was cool, had Facebook events. So, I say like what's old is new again. And then also having, new is new again, leveraging LLMs to put together groups. Because the problem is you can go to something and not connect. And what the science shows is you actually need to run into someone 5 to 10 times in a group setting, and you need to get to mutual disclosure of vulnerable information. Unless you're on this panel, in which case you start with vulnerable disclosure of, vulnerable disclosure.
We're bonded.
So that's the challenge for us, is figuring out how do we get people colliding on a ritual basis, and that led to us backing communities, which we just launched our product here in Austin, of people that do this, whether it's queer closet swaps or run clubs or people who are into going to live music together, because then you get a chance to figure out who you click with.
It's really fascinating. I imagine there are some parallels between how you think about matching people and Alyssa, what you're doing when you're trying to match people with fellows on your platform. How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, going back to the loneliness epidemic that we've all inevitably heard about by now, we've realized that it's more nuanced than us. I would imagine none of us would sit around being like, I'm lonely, right? But when you think about being in a tricky situation, overcoming a challenge, making a big decision, going through a big transition, you might have felt before like, wow, I don't really know who to turn to help me through this, right? You've got friends and family on one side, which give you the closeness, but don't give you the range, right? They might not actually have ever been in your position. And on the internet, you've got endless Reddit threads that are faceless and increasingly polarized. And so that gives you the range of topics, but not the closeness. And so what we're doing at Fellow is bringing that together. And we're finding that the contextual support is really helping people get through tough situations.
That's really helpful. Okay, I want to talk about one more aspect of sort of the mental journey of entrepreneurship, which is burnout and fatigue. This sort of the opposite side. Andy, you talked about bipolar, but everybody, whether they're clinically bipolar or not, has, especially if you're on this entrepreneurial journey, you're expending a whole lot of energy, and then there are times when oh my God, you got to shut down, right? I throw it out to all three of you. Jump in. Like, how do you manage that process?
I think one of the things that occurred to me just as we were talking about this, and it does relate to burnout, but let me just take a little bit of a roundabout way. It is important who you're surrounding yourself during this journey, right? And I think especially the earlier in the journey, you have to protect it. It's very easy for a really close friend to kill your idea or to take your mojo, and that leads to burnout, right? Like, I had an advisor. He's great. He's raised more money than me. He's done everything, but the dude just brought me down. I felt like quitting when I would talk to him. And I just, I just can't do that, right? And, I didn't, he'd already vested some shares, and it's fine. I'm not going to be vindictive. But I think, just as it's important to have a support group that is helping you on the mental health, you need a rah-rah section. You need somebody that kind of matches your irrational belief, because that's the one list that characteristics not on your list. There is sort of an irrationality. Like, it just isn't quite grounded in reality. Because if it was, it'd be so obvious, everybody would be doing it, and everybody would fund it. there's always
Alyssa
a
said
gap.
that right beforehand too, right?
Well, yeah, and I think I'm just giggling over here because I just burned through about 12 candidates for a role we're looking for, and I'm supposed to be the final stage of interviews. And I'm like, guys, I cannot put my finger on what the problem is. And after reflection, I was like, none of these people have good energy. And my team is like, what does that mean? And I'm like, I don't know exactly, but it has to, there's like a sprinkle of delusional optimism. There's a can-do attitude. There's a one foot in front of the other mindset. And you don't see that on a resume. It doesn't show up on LinkedIn. And you really just get that from spending hours with people. But it's so important to have that, especially in the first, dozen people that you're surrounding yourself with on this roller coaster ride.
Did you say a sprinkle of delusional optimism?
Yeah, I think that's approximately the measurement.
Does that go into the job descriptions at
I should
Fellow?
probably add it,
That's
actually.
the first characteristic.
That might
must be,
save us
right?
all a little bit of time.
That's amazing. That's really incredible. Are there ways that you guys think about sort of training your brains to sort of again, we're talking about these sort of traits that we want to use as superpowers that can also be things we need to overcome. Are there actual ways you think about that and try to condition your brain the same way you would your physical muscles to get ready to go swimming or something?
I like this forward description of a founder's job, which is create hope to find reality. And what's cool about it is hope and reality are often at odds, right? That's why we need the delusional optimism. So I've just gotten comfortable that 3 out of 5 days over the course of a year, I'm going to think my company's going to work. In 2 out of 5, I'm not, because they're both important. It's important to have the optimism, but for it not to be entirely delusional. So I've just gotten comfortable that, some days are not going to be good days, and that's just part of life. And in fact, it's fuel for figuring out why you're feeling that way, and therefore hopefully making changes and better decisions coming out of that mood state.
We are at time, you guys. This is an incredible conversation. Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be good.